What's going on? This is Theo Gremminger from Player Profiler here to bring you this week's fantasy football sleepers. We're talking about fantasy sleepers, we're talking about fantasy football stashes, and we're talking about fantasy football streamers. Every single week, I'm going to be dropping sleepers, streamers, and stashes, podcast, and video right here. And I want to help you find those players before they become hot names on the waiver wire. For some of you, these are going to be players you need to put into your lineup this week. For others, you're in better shape. You're ready to rock this week, but you want to get an edge on the rest of your league and add a player that maybe next week becomes a hot name on the waiver wire. And we don't always hit big with this video. This is one where we're specifically looking at sleepers. And what constitutes a sleeper is a player who's available in 70% of leagues right now. So if we looked at this like at the beginning of the week before waivers run, there's a lot better options. But a lot of those players get scooped up. So these are players sort of left out there. Depending on your league size, a few of these players are still going to be available to you right now. Some of you at times might be able to pause this video, pause your podcast, and go and grab one of these players right off of free agency. Some of you have like a secondary waiver wire. Sometimes it runs Saturday night. Sometimes it ends Sunday morning. However your league setting is, take a look for a couple of these players. Last week, we crushed it. And we're not going to be able to say that every single week because our threshold is so low. So we're going to celebrate when we have big wins. But if anybody watched this video last week, the number one wide receiver we were talking about and telling you to put in your lineups was Juan Jennings. And Juan Jennings had a historical sleeper type performance. And Juan Jennings' performance is sort of like, that's why you grind. That's why you're on the waiver wire. That's why you're trying to find these edges, because you never know when a player is going to have an opportunity to thrive and then absolutely runs with it like Jennings did. Jennings was ridiculous. Jennings had 3 touchdown catches, 175 receiving yards. This is like a one for the ages type. And that's probably going to be that is going to be the best one we get all year. But it still is motivation for us to try to find those weekly starts, those weekly guys we can get off of the wire. And then our quarterback recommendation last week, Sam Darnold. We had him super high up in the waiver wire as well. And Darnold goes nuts. Darnold has 4 passing touchdowns, leads the NFL in passing touchdowns right now. Darnold is playing fantastic. And Darnold is sort of like a life preserver if you were in quarterback, having quarterback issues. If you drafted a Caleb Williams thinking you were, going to get your QB1, maybe you had a quarterback you lost to injury, like things there. Like Sam Darnold, this is one where he's just been fantastic. I know I have him in some super flex leagues, and this was sort of like a happy to get him kind of guy. Now he's a locked-in starter. So again, when the opportunity presents itself to players and things sort of click, guys can beat expectations. It happens every week in the NFL, and we're going to try to identify those guys again today. So you can find my article at playerprofiler.com. I drop it. It usually drops a little bit earlier than the podcast and the video, but let's get after it. So let's stay at the quarterback position. We're going to talk about Justin Fields. Justin Fields is available in 73% of leagues still. Last week, we saw signs of life. So Fields, we talked about weeks 1 and 2, gets by Atlanta, gets by Denver, goes 2-0. Last week, home opener, and Fields played better, put up a better fantasy line. He had 245 passing yards and a passing touchdown. He also added another touchdown on the ground. Minimal rushing production. We know that that's in his wheelhouse, that he can get a big spike week rushing the ball. Fields is probably my favorite if you need a sleeper quarterback this week. I'm using him in one league, and I think this is an interesting matchup because we've seen the Colts be kind of shredded on the ground this year, and this is a defense that can be beat. So we're not over the top with Justin Fields. We have to be realistic in our expectations, but we did see a little bit more last week, and I think we'll see even more this week. Got to talk about a much deeper sleeper here. Let's talk about Andy Dalton. Available in 97% of leagues still. Nobody cares about his week last week, but Dalton was fantastic. The guy had 3 passing touchdowns, 300 passing yards, That's the first quarterback to do that combination all year long. And almost all of his production was in the first half. The guy was just ridiculous. So this is one where could Andy Dalton be the 2024 version of 2023 Joe Flacco, sort of an older quarterback who gets this opportunity and runs with it? I don't know, but I do think Andy Dalton should be in your super flex lineups this week. Then going a little further down the list, when we talk about players to stash, we got 2 stashes this week. Drake May, his time is coming in New England. He's available in 97% of leagues right now. He has the rushing upside and the big arm to be a fantasy-friendly quarterback. Hard to get excited about anything going on in New England right now, but Drake May is the future there. If you're looking for a speculative ad to stash on your roster, throw him in there. And then we got to talk about Tyler Huntley. This is one where we don't know who's going to start on Monday night. The Dolphins are being a little bit cryptic with this one, but Tyler Huntley, Snoop Huntley, this is a guy who gave us a lot of usable fantasy weeks. If you read my waiver wire column or my sleeper videos, like Huntley, when he filled in for Lamar Jackson, had some weeks where we used him. He had a QB1 overall week, or like a random like 35-point week at one point in his career. So it's a guy that we're not expecting that, but we do know that he's much more talented than Skylar Thompson or Tim Boyle, and much more capable of putting up a big fantasy number. So it's a bad situation in Miami. They're averaging like 11 points per game. I would expect to see Huntley, especially if you're in a Superflex league. If you're in Superflex, make sure Tyler Huntley's rostered just in case, because he might give you some top 20 weeks, which has utility in Superflex. He's one to grab. Let's talk about the running back position. Roschon Johnson. Roschon Johnson was one of my top waiver wire ads this week. Probably my favorite running back sleeper this week. It takes a little bit of a leap of faith, let's put it, to use a Chicago running back. But some of you might be in some dire straits here, and you're looking for a little bit of a play that could be a sort of an edge. I do think grabbing Roschon and putting him on your bench, whether you want to use him or not this weekend, is a smart thing to do. DeAndre Swift has been very, very poor in his play. Roschon flashed last week. He had 62 combined yards. He had 4 catches. And the 4 catches is sort of what's gonna carry Roschon to potentially some fantasy viable weeks. He's a big back who can catch the football. That matters. We've seen it with guys like Zach Charbonnet. We've seen it with guys like Ramondre Stevenson. When you have size and the ability to handle some volume as a runner if needed, then I think Roschon's interesting. This could also end up being a complete mess with Khalil Herbert, Roschon Johnson, and DeAndre Swift seeing touches. So tread lightly, but I'm going to be a little bit more optimistic on Roschon than others. I added him on the waiver wire in a few leagues this week, put some decent sized bids on him because I think that this could happen where he ends up being the most productive Chicago running back this year. And with his ability to pass block and his ability to catch the football out of the backfield, I think he helps Caleb Williams. So Roschon Johnson, we want to pick him up. If he's still on your waiver wire, make sure you grab him. A fun little spot start here. Cordero Patterson. Cordero Patterson is one where he's available in 97% of leagues. He had 48 yards on 7 touches last week. Jaylen Warren is out. The Pittsburgh Steelers, again, they play that Indianapolis Colts defense. Patterson had a RB1 not overall, but he had an RB1 season under Arthur Smith in Atlanta. It was his best season as a pro. He follows Arthur Smith over to Pittsburgh. There's obviously a connection between the offensive coordinator and the player, and Patterson's an older guy. So for him to kind of like hitch his wagon with Arthur Smith, to me, it's like this is the opportunity for him to have a sneaky game where he could give you like a high-end RB3 week. And I think he's going to get the touches this week. So this is one where he's not rostered pretty much anywhere. It's very much you're playing for the floor, not necessarily the ceiling. I don't think Cordero is going to go off, but if you need a running back to get you through the week with like 10 points, 12 points, I think that's in the wheelhouse this week. And depending on your team needs, that might have some value to you. Emmanuel Wilson, another really fun one. Emmanuel Wilson, the market didn't really pick up too much this past week. He's still available in 87% of leagues, and this is despite him having 85 yards on 14 touches last week. So Emmanuel Wilson is one where I'd like to scoop him up kind of wherever he's available. This is like cleanup waivers for you. He's getting the Marshawn Lloyd role that we wanted Lloyd to get. And you're seeing it with Wilson, where Wilson is getting those weekly touches now. Matt LaFleur offense, he wants to use multiple running backs. He's done it every single year. Even in years where like Aaron Jones was cooking, you'd still see a second back mixed in. They're not going to run Josh Jacobs into the complete ground. So Emmanuel Wilson, I think, has some utility here. And Marshawn Lloyd can't seem to stay healthy. Anybody who watches Player Profiler or listens to my podcast knows Marshawn Lloyd was my guy. Really loved him in the draft process, and I have quite a lot of in Dynasty, but it's a concerning that he can't stay on the field right now. He struggled with injuries, pretty much since OTAs, training camp, like a lot of things going on with Marshawn. So I don't think it's out of the realm of possibilities that Wilson ends up getting some starts this year if Josh Jacobs misses time. So Wilson's playing well. The coaching staff likes him. Go scoop him up. This is an offense that we like. And when Jordan Love comes back, this is an offense we're going to really like. Samaje Perine. Samaje Perine's available in 74% of leagues. This is sort of I'm sure there were some people dropping Perine last week with Carson Steele sort of outplaying him, outpacing him last week. To me, this is still a backfield that's very much up in the air. And I think we'll learn a lot more this week after they play the Chargers. Kareem Hunt's going to be active this week. So this whole thing could be a complete mess, and one where we can't really predict the weekly usage. But I do think after this week, we might find out that Samaje Perine is a valuable receiver to have in this offense. And if we can identify certain matchups where teams are pretty easy to go up against for pass catching backs, and we can find a little bit of an edge there, then I think maybe we can find something here. So the Chargers have been very generous to opposing running backs as pass catchers like all season long. Alexander Madison had 4 catches and a touchdown. The Pittsburgh running backs, that's Najee Harris, Jalen Warren, and Cordero Patterson, had 9 catches combined against the Chargers. And then Miles Sanders and Chuba Hubbard for Carolina combined for 7 catches. So pretty much every game that the Chargers have played, you've had either a running back or multiple running backs put up receiving usage that was promising and productive. Nobody went crazy. Like Madison gets that touchdown. I think I know that looks good, but it seems to me this is a little bit more of a pass funnel defense to opposing running backs, but we'll take it. I think Samaje Perine right now is cheap. Grab him, see where this thing goes, and you can always cut him loose if it doesn't go his way this weekend. Now, this is a quick reminder. We talked about guys like Juan Jennings, next man in mentality in the NFL, and the next man in mentality in fantasy football. Right now, if you have a roster spot that can support it, Ray Davis, available in 89% of leagues, Isaac Guerrero, available in 97% of leagues, and Justice Hill, available in 87% of leagues. All 3 of these players are direct handcuffs in offenses that are very good. Buffalo, San Francisco, Baltimore. So these are sort of the lottery tickets that we want to have to be able to use if we need. And you're also going to save yourself an exceptional amount of FAAB money if one of these guys is on your roster and the back ahead of them goes down. All 3 of these guys would be huge FAAB additions if there was an injury in front of them. So grab them. Let's talk about Tyler Beatty, super deep sleeper. Tyler Beatty last week had 70 rushing yards for Denver. No one knows how this backfield will shake out, but Beatty is free. He's available in 98% of leagues, and he showed kind of the most rushing juice that we've seen out of this backfield all season long. So does the coaching staff give him another opportunity? I'll say this. The Denver Broncos defense is much better than we thought. So I think if they can get some sort of running back production to support that defense and keep them off the field, that's something that they can lean on to keep this team competitive. So I don't think Beatty is like a throwaway. I think he might get a second look. Now, does it amount to anything? Probably not, but he's a guy you can grab and put on your bench for nothing and see where this thing goes. And if we don't see him get another opportunity this weekend, let him loose. It was a 1-week blip. But I think there was enough there where he's going to get at least another opportunity. We'll see, though. And let's talk about one more like deep stash. Kendre Miller's coming off the IR shortly. This is a fun fantasy sleeper here. This is a guy who was in the doghouse all summer long, but was a third-round pick out of TCU in the 2023 NFL draft. Is he buried in this backfield? Like he can't beat out Jamal Williams? I don't know about that. And also, this is a player where he's got the youth in a backfield with a bunch of old running backs. Alvin Kamara playing exceptional football, but he's 29 years old. Can Kamara hold up for a 17-game season? Does Kendre Miller get an opportunity in the second half of the year? Again, probably not, but it's worth a shot. And I'll say that the New Orleans Saints offense had 2 exceptional games in weeks 1 and 2. Then in week 3, the Philadelphia game has taken a lot of luster off this offense. I think this is a good offense. I think they'll turn things around. Well, let's see. And Kendre Miller's one where I'd like to have a few shares stashed, especially leagues where you have an IR spot. Take a look for that one. Now let's talk about the wide receiver position. We gotta get hyped here because last week we got Juan Jennings, and we don't have a Juan Jennings, but I do have one player that I think you can stream in the flex this week in your wide receiver 3 spot with some excitement. And this is a player that I think could give you a really nice week. Michael Wilson, Arizona Cardinals, second-year player, third-round pick in the NFL draft. One of my favorite sleepers on the week. Washington Commanders have been generous to opposing wide receiver 1s. We all know that. Jamar Chase went nuts last week. But they've also been generous to opposing wide receiver 2s. Andre Yoshevas had a very strong game against them last week. So this is one where Arizona is going to also lean on a secondary pass catcher this week. It's going to be Marvin Harrison Jr., and then Michael Wilson, I think, slides right into the number 2 targeted role. We have Trey McBride dealing with a concussion. He's going to miss. So Wilson's also coming off of a very strong week 3 where he had 8 catches for 64 yards and he had 9 targets. So Wilson, again, this is a player where I think he complements Marvin Harrison Jr. well. I had Wilson as a top 10 waiver wire addition in my waiver wire column and waiver wire video this week as well. I think Wilson, if he has one more strong week this week, is going to be a super popular waiver wire addition heading into week 5. This is a player where like shallow league managers are going to start picking him up. If we remember, Wilson played at Stanford, went to the Senior Bowl, had solid draft capital, and last year had a couple of moments where we sort of expected more. He had that one really big touchdown against Dallas, but there was like a lot of moments where he just missed having like a really solid fantasy output. I think it's starting to click in year 2. Let's be a week ahead on Michael Wilson. Staying with wide receiver, Andre Yoshevas, available in 80% of leagues. He tied Jamar Chase in targets last week with 7, and he caught 5 of them for 52 yards and a touchdown. And then in week 2, he had like a random 2 touchdown game where it was sort of like the production was minimal, but he had the 2 touchdown catches. And usually you dismiss that. But now Yoshevas, dating back to last year, has 5 touchdown catches over his last 4 weeks. So this is a guy that is becoming a touchdown scorer. Now, some people are going to say that's not a static stat. We can't bank on touchdowns. But when it comes to Yoshevas, they seem to be continually using him in the red zone, and he has athleticism. He's a big slot receiver. I want to roster him in a few places. A sleeper, one where you can stash and hopefully not use this week, but this is a really fun stash. Xavier Legette. Look for Legette to take on a big role in this Panthers offense with Adam Thielen set to miss some time with a hamstring injury. The Panthers traded up and selected Legette in the first round of the NFL draft. And now he's going to have this like huge opportunity to help us on like a weekly basis. So I'm into Legette. We talked about Andy Dalton, and we said Andy Dalton is going to be a guy who can at least elevate some of his skill position players around him. And with Legette, there's an opportunity here. Deontay Johnson's going to be heavily targeted. Chuba Hubbard and then maybe Jonathan Brooks out of the backfield will get a lot of looks. But after that, I think there's an opportunity. So we're going to grab Xavier Legette, not use him this week, but he's a perfect stash. When we come right back, we're going to reveal the rest of our wide receiver sleepers, and we're going to talk about tight ends.
Hey, this will just take a second. I want to talk about our player rankings, the weekly rankings, the weekly projections. Billy, Theo, and our analytics geniuses getting your start sit decisions dialed in that flex tab. And then you get the season rankings. Want to make add drop decisions? The season rankings are updated every week all year. And you have the best dynasty rankings ever as part of the player rankings package. And don't forget the offensive line rankings. Dan Fornick, one of the best in the business. New running back starting this week. Hey, is that offensive line top 10? Yeah, okay, start him. And we rank the cornerbacks out to like CB 100 with the corresponding receiver they're going to be matched up with most this coming week. The player rankings are the thing you need during the season on playerprofiler.com. Check it out.
What's going on? Theo Gremminger back here, giving you your sleepers, your streamers, and your stashes for week 4. And we're going to stay right at the wide receiver position. And we talked about Michael Wilson. We talked about Xavier Legette. We talked about Andre Yoshivas. And all of those guys are sort of like the next man in mentality at times this year. Trey Tucker is starting to be that for Las Vegas. So Trey Tucker, a little background, 3rd round pick, 2023 NFL draft. So he has the draft capital. And then last week in Las Vegas's loss to Carolina, he had 7 catches for 96 yards and a touchdown. His best game as a pro. Now Devontae Adams is set to miss time. So it's going to be Jacoby Myers, it's going to be Brock Bowers, and it's going to be Trey Tucker. Trey Tucker is a player that Antonio Pierce was praising all offseason long. They like him in Vegas, and he's going to get an opportunity. This is one where you go out and you grab him for $0, you grab him for $1, you stick him on your bench, and you see what happens. We also have a potential outcome of Devontae Adams being traded at some point this season. And that might be something where it's actually likely to happen. The way that the Vegas season is moving along, moving on and getting something for Devontae Adams and being younger next year makes a lot of sense. So we'll see that. But Trey Tucker has really flashed for us. He's got some athleticism, and the coaching staff likes him. Staying with wide receiver, Jalen Nailor, available in 87% of leagues. Jordan Addison's going to return this week, so it'll be interesting to see if Nailor can hold up. But Nailor has 3 touchdowns in 3 games. This is a player that Sam Darnold seems to like, and this offense is clicking. I would not go out and cut Jalen Nailor if you have him, and I would think about picking him up if the Nailor manager is like, he's not going to get anything with Jordan Addison. Nailor hasn't had a real increase in targets, but he's been good with what's come to him. And there's some solid metrics showing him as a very, very good separator. So there could be some self-scouting for them to get Jalen Nailor a bit more involved. It's also a tough defense that Minnesota is going up against in Green Bay. And maybe they are looking to kind of sell out and try to take away Jefferson and opening things up for other players on the offense. So Nailor's an interesting kind of dart throw. Another interesting dart throw, Tutu Atwell, available in 93% of leagues, led the way in Week 3's win over San Francisco, had 92 receiving yards, and he caught a 50-yarder late in the 4th quarter. He helped lead the Rams to victory. Now, this is a mess. Really hard to kind of predict the weekly usage for the Rams wide receivers, but Atwell had so much more productivity than any other Ram receiver last week. He's worth keeping just to see if this earned him more opportunities this week. And I hope you don't have to use him, but at least you'd be using him coming off of a big week. Going to the tight end position, Zach Ertz. Zach Ertz has a revenge game narrative. We also have a Cliff Kingsbury revenge game narrative. The Washington Commanders on a short week are playing the Arizona Cardinals. Ertz had 5 catches in Week 3's win over Cincinnati. Exactly what we want to see out of Ertz. He's not going to give us this massive spike weeks, but he can be a safety blanket for Jaden Daniels, and he can give you these 5 catches a week. I really think this could be in the outcome. If you take a look at Washington and sort of how their makeup is, They have a lot of youth, and then they have Terry McLaurin, and they have Zach Ertz, and a couple of wide receivers sort of not taking off. They also have this week where Austin Eckler is set to miss. So that's another few available touches for a guy like Ertz. I'm going to use Ertz in a couple of leagues this week. I'm not thrilled about it, but I don't think it's going to ruin my chances of victory. I think he's going to give me double-digit points in a regular PPR league, and he has even more utility in tight end premium formats. Dart throw tight end, fun one, real fun one. If you're in dire straits, I have a couple of teams where I have like Sam Laporta and Trey McBride. If we hear some bad reports about Sam Laporta is set to miss Monday night, I might use Elijah Higgins. And Elijah Higgins, we talked about Michael Wilson chasing the matchup against Washington. Elijah Higgins gets the start with Trey McBride concussed. Higgins had a touchdown in week 1 for Arizona. He is a 6'3", 230-pound converted wide receiver who runs a 4.5 40. So he's an athletic tight end. He's going to have an opportunity to make a few plays. We know Kyler Murray's been heavily utilizing the tight end position this year, and it's probably because it's Trey McBride. But if it's one of those things where Higgins might get a few extra looks, Higgins might find the end zone this week. Talking about another player to stash, Eric All, Cincinnati Bengals, available in 99% of leagues. Long-term stashers, if you want to look for a player to put on your bench that has a role that could be growing and growing as the season moves along, Eric All is the future tight end in Cincinnati. The situation is sort of similar to like a Pat Freiermuth in his rookie year. And if anybody recalls, Freiermuth was a guy who was in our fantasy lineups all throughout the second half of the season. When it comes to All, just stick him on your bench, sort of see what happens. But this is a player that was injured in college, and that sort of brought the draft capital down. Michigan and Iowa, was at both schools and had a lot of promise. There were some scouts who really, really liked him as well, and a few evaluators of talent that we had on some of my podcasts this summer. They loved him as a prospect. So the Bengals seem to like him. The Bengals are 0-3. There's going to be some changes on this offense, and using Eric All might be something that we see a little bit more of. That's it for this week. I hope you liked this show. I hope this is helping you out. I hope you used Juan Jennings last week. I had a Juan Jennings in a few starting lineups, but there was definitely one or two where I had him on the bench and didn't put him in. So go with your gut in some of these decisions. We're not out here throwing darts. If you get stuck and your team looks like it's going to be hard for you to win, sit back, make some calculated decisions. You're always going to be able to find some sleepers out there. You just got to grind. And hopefully you pick up a couple of these players and we're able to sort of beat everybody to the waiver wire. And if you like this video, you like this podcast, make sure you're listening to my waiver wire show, Waiver Wired. You can get that anywhere you get your podcasts. You can find it on Player Profiler YouTube, and you can find my waiver wire column at playerprofiler.com. So we got you covered for everything waiver wire, everything sleeper. We're trying to help you find the edges you need to win in fantasy football this season, and we got you covered. Let's crush it this Sunday.
Hey, I want to thank you for being part of this broadcast. If you have any thoughts on it, leave a comment. If you enjoyed it, make sure you leave a like. And if you want to see more shows on the Player Profiler channel, subscribe to it. That's how we know you want more.